Hello everyone and welcome to this video. Now today I'm going to be doing an album review. I'm going to be taking a look at this record here, which is the debut album by Paul McCartney, simply titled McCartney. So yes, I'll just be doing my usual thing in this video, giving a bit of background information about the album, showing you both my vinyl copy of it and the deluxe archive edition of the album, and then going over each of the tracks in detail. So if you've got a bit of a feeling of a deja vu while watching this video, then it's because I've actually already reviewed this album, albeit many years ago, kind of when I first sort of started out making videos, and basically wasn't scoring any off the songs. So now I've got a kind of spreadsheet that has a record of all the scores I've ever given. But basically a lot of the videos I made then and albums I reviewed on that sort of that list. So I thought that I would kind of go back and revisit some of those videos. A lot of them are McCartney and Beatles related, and I thought, yeah, this would be a good place to start with it. Anyway, this album was released on the 17th of April back in 1970, and it was around it was made during the time when I guess the tensions with the Beatles really had reached breaking point. They hadn't officially disbanded by the time this album was being made, but certainly at this point John Lennon had privately indicated indicated that he was wanting to leave the band. And around this time there was also a business deal with Alan Klein, put sort of further distance between McCartney and his former bandmates. So around this time, towards the tail end of 1969, McCartney retreated to his farm on the Mullican Tyre, spending a lot of time with his new family. He'd recently Paul and Linda had recently welcomed baby Mary into the family, and they were just having some on the surface at least good quality time. But for McCartney personally, it was quite a tough sort of period, seeing the band that he had sort of grown up in really fracturing. He was suffering from some quite severe depression around this time, often drinking and I guess just living his life a little bit without purpose. So the sessions for this album began in the December of 1969, with McCartney initially setting up a 4-track recording machine in his home in Cavendish Avenue in London. So not a home studio or anything, literally just one machine with a single microphone, and he'd record some tracks on here very primitively. So these early home sessions were accompanied by visits to both Morgan Studios and EMI's Abbey Road studios, which slightly I don't say spoils the myth a little bit of this album being an entirely homespun homemade creation, when about more than half the tracks here were actually professionally recorded in professional studios. Although it does retain the sense of this homespun sense, because it is McCartney playing all the instruments, and it is genuinely self-recorded. But this myth that's developed around it of this being a lo-fi masterpiece, or it being the first home recorded album, is doesn't quite bear true when you do consider that he did spend quite a bit of studio time making this album. So by the time off its release in the April of 1970, McCartney's ill feelings towards the Beatles had probably hardened compared to when he first went into making this album. So he there's a bit of a standoff where McCartney refused to change the release date of this album to avoid a clash with the Beatles' Let It Be album, and he published a very blunt self-interview where he basically dismissed the idea of the Beatles ever working together again. And this was very quickly picked up on by the music press, who took it as the very much the clearest indication that the Beatles were no more, and it was I guess really considered the first public announcement of that. Now in retrospect, I guess some would accuse McCartney of using the breakup of the Beatles and announcing the breakup of the Beatles as a publicity vehicle for this album. Certainly given the fact that Lennon had had like kind of very privately sort of said that he was leaving, but kind of respectfully, like in like a way, kind of like kept it quiet. You know, McCartney very much just kind of came out the floodgates with this album, and like his kind of statements like at the time, like sort of like saying, yeah, the Beatles like were like no more. Now in this context of kind of McCartney being seen like as the bogeyman and as the kind of sort of like as like the figure who kind of like sort of like disbanded and like broke up the Beatles, like the reviews for this album were mostly like unenthusiastic. Now commercially it did really well, like sort of like in like America this was a #1 album on the charts, staying in the #1 position for 3 weeks, while in the UK it peaked at #2. There would also be a conscious decision not to release any singles from the album, despite there being certainly at least one standout track, which I think would have done very, very, very well like as a single. Now, retrospective assessment of the album is a lot more positive, with, like as I said, many people nowadays seeing this as a really good sort of example of kind of early kind of DIY indie kind of music sort of thing, kind of very homespun like sort of album, and it definitely has that kind of aesthetic like going like sort of like right through it, and would prove, yeah, very like influential to a new generation of musicians. So anyway, I will just now show you my copies of the album here. So we've got this, which is the original vinyl pressing of the album. So there is the nice cover. I actually really like this cover. A lot of people say that they prefer this sort of photo like as the cover, and I believe this was originally earmarked like as the cover. But I actually really like this cover. I think it's different, it's bold, and yeah, I think it's really good. But this is still a great photograph though of Paul with, yeah, Baby Mary like in like his jacket pocket there. Really, really nice photo. And then the gatefold to this is just a kind of photo collage of kind of the McCartneys both on their farm, but also they went on quite a lot of kind of foreign holidays as well, like around this time. So yeah, really nice kind of photo sort of collage there. And in terms of the record, this is just a standard pressing on the Apple label there, like all the early solo Beatles releases were there, just on Apple. Okay, now as I said, I've also got this to show here, which is the archive edition of the album. This came out quite a few years ago. This was one of the first archive editions they did, before they maybe went a bit too excessive with them, or I mean, there's certainly very lavish packages these days, but this was kind of very early like in the series when they were essentially just kind of hardbound books like with CDs. But they're really nicely done, these. Again, it just kind of goes through the album. There's lots of great photographs with all the kit that they used on the record, which is really nice. All of his guitars there, which is great to see. Lots of photographs, a kind of like interview with Paul as well about the album. Yeah, just lovely photographs in here. Yeah, really nicely done, like this like archive edition of it. You get some bonus material on here, but as far as I can remember, none of it is particularly spectacular. Like, I think the bonus audio, you get 7 tracks, and most of them are actually live tracks from 1979, which in my view don't really belong like on this album. So you can kind of almost tell here there was very little kind of outtakes and kind of left off this album. It was kind of just almost everything like he'd recorded, he kind of just sort of shoved on this album, like kind of like very quickly. So anyway, I will just now go over each of the album's tracks in detail. I'll score each song out of 10, and then use those scores to give us a overall percentage marking for the album. Okay, so the first track up is The Lovely Linda. Now, I am in two minds whether to actually sort of properly score this song, because it is a very short track. It's the shortest track in Paul McCartney's discography, and it's essentially like an unfinished snippet like of a song that McCartney recorded primarily to test like his recording equipment. Now, it certainly is like a really nice kind of charming piece with sort of like spontaneous kind of background noises. You hear kind of doors opening, and then McCartney kind of breaking out like into laughter like at like the end like of like the track. It's short, it's inconsequential, it does no harm like opening the album, but am I ever going to seek this song out? Not really, no. So yeah, The Lovely Linda would get a 6 out of 10 to kick things off. That would be something, really would be something. Now, the first kind of, I guess, proper full-length song on the album, but in my view, no less unfinished and kind of sort of rushed off like The Lovely Linda is, and That Would Be Something. Essentially, this song is quite underwritten. It's essentially just one verse and quite a repetitive kind of chorus with essentially just 2 lines to it. But I think what keeps this song interesting and why I'm giving it a 7 out of 10 is the production on it. I think is really good. I really like the kind of like the guitar part. It's this kind of, I think it's McCartney playing his like Epiphone Casino guitar, and it just sounds great. And then kind of McCartney doing these various kind of vocalizations of kind of different like sort of like drum sounds and like that like sort of thing. But like at the same time though, it does also feel a little bit unfinished and like underwritten. But it is a nice song though. It's a good production, I think, and like again, it just kind of is set in this kind of very carefree vibe like of the album. Next track up is Valentine's Day. Now, this is the first of a handful of instrumental tracks on the album, and this is one that I rather like, actually. It's quite short. It's probably one of the more kind of throwaway, like, instrumental tracks, like, on the album. Got some nice kind of bluesy guitar, like, on it. Very kind of quite abrasive sounding. It does really evoke a kind of feeling of, I guess, anger or, like, anxiousness to it. But again, it has this kind of slapdash feel to it. But very kind of, yeah, like, quite intimate production still. Sort of, like, you can very much pick out and hear like every instrument and like every component like of like this song. But at the same time, we're still 3 tracks in, and we've not actually had a kind of proper fully written sort of song yet like on the album.
And be with you.
But that is very much rectified by the next track, which is Every Night, which is a great song. I think lyrically it's got quite a lot of meaning and depth to it, this track, kind of describing the kind of depression that McCartney was experiencing like at like the time, like as like the Beatles like disintegrated. He sings like every day I don't want to get out of my bed, but also the kind of he kind of contrasts these kind of personal feelings with the kind of comfort and love like of like his family like in like this difficult time. He sings like, but tonight I just want to stay in and be with you, is the kind of like key line like off like the song. Now also with this track, this is one of many tracks on the album that very nearly could have been like a Beatles track. So like he'd had this track I think kicking about I think since sort of the summer of 1968, and he actually did play it a few times during the kind of Get Back Let It Be sessions, but they never kind of worked on it or like kind of like sort of like it was never really like in serious contention like for that album, and I think was still a little bit like unfinished, but like it kind of like yeah, kind of like worked it up like into like kind of like a fully fledged kind of song here. Wee observation here, the kind of chorus bit like on this, the kind of wordless chorus has a very similar melody to like the opening of like You Never Give Me Your Money. It'd be interesting to know whether McCartney had this song written first, or like this bit of this song written first, or like whether he had like the You Never Give Me Your Money melody first. But no, it's a really great song here. Yeah, McCartney classic here, like in my book. So Every Night will get a 10 out of 10. Next up for me is called Hot as Sun / Glasses here. Now this is a slightly muddled piece on the album. It's another instrumental track, and it's one that McCartney's kind of pulled together from like a variety like of sources. So the first bit of Hot as Sun is this kind of Caribbean tinged track. Apparently dates back to McCartney's sort of teenage years, like when he kind of first started writing music, and it's a kind of pleasing enough like instrumental. It's not one like of like his best like by any stretch of the imagination though. It's then being kind of joined together with a piece called Glasses, which is a kind of moody and kind of like atmospheric piece, essentially made with sort of like using like wine glasses and kind of spinning sort of like spinning like sort of like a dampened finger like over like the top of them. I mean, it's okay, it's nothing much, it's interesting sounds, but it's nothing great. And then it kind of ends this piece with a kind of snippet like of a track that of of like a track called Suicide that McCartney had originally written with Frank Sinatra like in mind, which again, it's a kind of like, it's a 10-second snippet, like if that, just to end the piece. It's a little bit puzzling, this one, for me. It just doesn't quite do it for me. So yeah, Hot as Sunglasses would get a 6 out of 10. Okay, and then the next track up on the album is called Junk. Now, I guess this is a track that is probably one of the more noteworthy songs on the album, and is definitely one of the tracks that gets comes in for like a lot of praise. But for me, it's never been a sort of top-tier favourite McCartney song like off mine. Again, its history goes back a fair bit. It was demoed for the White Album, but was kind of like left off it, like sort of thing. Perhaps I think McCartney like has a lot of like acoustic spots like on the White Album, and I think maybe if this was on it, might have been maybe like one too many. It's a really good song though, in terms of it's got really nice, pleasing melody, like to it. Lyrics are maybe the kind of letdown like on this track, where it kind of describes sort of, I guess, various things that have been kind of left like lying around, like and discarded sort of thing, like in favour of kind of new things. So it kind of sings like, bye bye says the sign in the shop window, why says the junk in the yard, kind of like goes like the chorus. And then I said the verse is this kind of list of kind of seemingly kind of random objects like candlesticks, building bricks, something old and new. It goes, it just doesn't quite hang together for me like as a kind of cohesive song, but it is a very strong melody though. But yeah, just one where I think the lyrics are maybe a slightly weaker spot for me.
Yes, we was lonely, but now we're fine.
Okay, and then side one closes off with A Man We Was Lonely. Now, this is a really fun little country-tinged track here. Certainly one of the more developed tracks like on the album, and was written and kind of added to the album very much like at like the last minute. Again, there's a few things annoying me about this song. The kind of grammatical like incorrection does get on my nerves. It shouldn't be Man We Was Lonely, it should be Man We Were Lonely, like if like you're being kind of sort of proper like hard up like on like your grammar, and that does unfortunately get on like my nerves like a little bit. But even then, just the song itself has generally never been a favourite of mine. The kind of lyrical kind of concept is this kind of us against the world kind of thing, of kind of sort of quite rooted in kind of like Paul and Linda's like relationship, and I guess maybe a bit of like their kind of public perception sort of thing, like they weren't kind of flavour like off like the month like around this time. It's got Linda's first appearance like on harmony vocals like on this track, which is nice, but again the song has just never really been a favourite track of mine. Okay, and then side 2 opens up with a burst of energy called Ooh You, which is another really fun track. This one probably the hardest rocker like on the album, like I would say. Again, it's a bit like That Would Be Something. It's kind of like the production sound really make this track for me, where you've got like, again, some awesome guitar work on it and some great drumming, and I think there's some kind of cowbell or like other percussion work going on. It just sounds great. But again, the lyrics on this I think were very much just made up like on like the spot and don't go that deep. It kind of he sings like he sort of sings like you look like a woman, dress like a lady, talk like a baby, goes like the first. So just these kind of mindless kind of like rhyming sort of like phrases on it. But it's a good song though, again, when you bring together the music and the production and his vocal as well being particularly strong, it does make this like a somewhat compelling track. So yeah, Ooh You would get a 7 out of 10. Another instrumental number now is called Mama Miss America, which is a track that was originally kind of 2 separate kind of pieces. The first section, you've got this great piano melody like on it, very engaging, very kind of a lot of like momentum to it. And again, like a lot of the instrumentals like on this album, I like the way he kind of builds it up slowly. So it just starts with the basic piano line, and then you get these kind of slightly flanged kind of guitar sounds on it, which I think is like really interesting. And then the second half like off the track is a bit more guitar and bass driven, bit more kind of not rocking, but a kind of like the bass is doing a lot of like the heavy lifting like on it. Again, it sounds great, it's really well produced, this track, but it's probably not the most interesting piece of music like you've ever heard. Again, it feels to me, certainly I think the second half feels like a kind of template for what could have been a really great, fully fledged kind of song, but was one that he chose just like not to develop further. But still a good song though. So yeah, Mama Miss America would get a 7 out of 10.
Ted used to tell her he'd be twice as good, and he knew he could.
Okay, next up on the album is a Teddy Boy here. Now, this is another track that McCartney had lying around for quite a while, certainly at least about a year before this album. They kind of rehearsed it a fair bit, actually, with the Beatles in January of 1969 during the Get Back sort of sessions, and was actually got very, very, very close to being on the Get Back / Let It Be album, but I think Phil Spector decided not to like include it like on the album, and I guess rightfully so, because I think this is a weak track personally. I mean, the other Beatles like there is a Beatles version of it like out there, like, of course, and you know, John Lennon and the other Beatles just aren't taking it seriously at all. I think they're treating the track a bit I guess you could say disrespectfully, but it's also a song that I don't think warrants a lot of respect, like personally. And I guess it's, you know, this kind of recording of it, I just don't think does the song like any favors. Like on the surface, it kind of lyrically has a lot of potential. It kind of talks, it's a kind of story song about a kind of widow and the kind of son, and kind of got like he kind of like had like a soldier dad who kind of sort of died like in like a war, and then it's a kind of tale of this kind of widow trying to find new love. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics they could have explored like on this song, but it still feels a little bit trite though, and just doesn't really really reach the full potential that kind of narrative possibly had. Okay, and then the next track up is called Sing Along Junk. Now, this is basically what it says on the tin, an instrumental version of the track Junk. Now, yeah, like I'm giving this like an 8 out of 10, which is the same score like I am giving to the main track. And I guess you could say, well, you know, like the lyrics were the thing that you didn't like about Junk, so an instrumental version surely you would prefer. But I am giving them like the same score. I think just in terms of this is a bit more kind of fully developed, I suppose. So there's a piano like overdub, and there's some kind of mellotron strings on it, which adds nice dimension to the original version. It's a very pretty song. This really lets the melody come alive, but again, it is just an instrumental, and I'm very much very reluctant to give like instrumental tracks really high scores, like unless like I really like them. So Sing Along Junk like is getting like an 8 out of 10. I think it is the highest scoring instrumental like on the album, maybe aside from one which we'll get to, but no, a really good song there. We'll get an 8 out of 10. Okay, and then the penultimate track on the album is probably the most famous, well, definitely the most famous track on the album, which is Maybe I'm Amazed. Now, this is a true McCartney classic, this one here. Some would say his greatest ever song. It's a kind of similar theme in kind of its lyrics to, I guess, like Every Night, which is kind of this kind of depressed and kind of troubled man, kind of rescued and kind of brought sort of to his senses, I guess, by the kind of love and sort of care like of like his family and that. And I guess the magic of this song lies really in the fact that everything comes together. So you have these lyrics which are meaningful, like emotive, but paired with McCartney's vocal, which is his very best vocals like ever like put like to record. Like, I mean, some would say like again like his greatest like ever vocal. But then you've also got the production on this, which this was a track that they recorded like in like Abbey Road, so it's not a homespun production, but it still feels quite intimate. Particularly like the guitar sound very direct. The drumming on it is a little bit loose, a little bit messy, but just perfectly suits the song. I would say that with this track, it's a song that was later released like as a single, like in like a live version, but this is always a version I go to. Give me this version over any live version of like the track. So yeah, no, Maybe I'm Amazed, a real classic there, an absolute gem, a 10 out of 10. Okay, and then the last track on the album, and possibly the most kind of surprising, controversial score I'm going to give, is to Krina Corey, which I'm actually giving like an 8 out of 10 to now. I think if I was to go back and watch my original review, I think I probably would have been very quick to dismiss this track. But now, you know, a bit more mature now, I actually really like this track. It's a song that came to Paul after watching a documentary about a Brazilian tribe or just happening to watch, or like just happening to come across it like on TV like one night, and he was trying to sort of, I guess, create a kind of soundtrack to the scenes like off like them hunting sort of thing. This is a very daring song, you know, for the album. I guess so far, like on the album, yes, you've had instrumental tracks, you've had kind of slightly unfinished kind of snippets of songs, but you've not had a kind of, I guess, freak out track like this. And I think he's really trying to, I guess, say to the other Beatles on this, like, you know, where John Lennon was doing all these crazy like experimental stuff, George Harrison had just put out like the Electronic Sound album. I think he's saying here, you know, like I was the experimental one like originally, and like kind of like sort of trying to reclaim like that sort of status, and I think really works. Again, it's so different to anything like on the album. It's a track that really comes alive like when you listen to it like through headphones. The drums take center stage. I think it's some excellent drumming. Again, you've got McCartney, he's doing some great like heavy breathing work like on it, and it just sort of really a very visceral sounding track, this one here, and yeah, like I said, like one that really comes alive through the kind of stereo mix like of it. So yeah, Krina Corey I actually really like, and yeah, I would give an 8 out of 10 to. So overall, this album would get a score of 75%. So I think this album is a very loose and free affair. You know, it represents really a kind of big contrast between the last project that McCartney like had been involved with, of course, like the majestic like Abbey Road album. I think what makes this album strong is I think it is great. Is definitely greater than the sum of its parts. You know, like when like you break down like every song, I've kind of nitpicked like with like some of the tracks, things I don't like about them. But for me, when this whole album comes together, I think it really makes for a great sounding record. It's got a great charm to it. It's got a great production on it. I just do think it maybe is lacking in some top quality songs aside from Every Night, Junk, and maybe I'm Amazed. There's really not a lot else on here like off like Real Substance. But it was a great start to his kind of solo career, like a great record to kick it off, you know, very much wiping the slate clean. Really, the only way was up in terms of both production, but also in terms of quality, like as well, like, you know, like his albums, like I think, I was gonna say like his albums like would get better and better, but you'd have like kind of peaks and troughs, like as like he'd go through like the 70s, but certainly this was a great kind of starting point for him to kind of like explore, like a solo career sort of further. So no, yeah, I hope you have enjoyed my review there of Paul McCartney's McCartney album. So yes, I would be interested to know what you think of the album down below in the comments, and yep, I'll see you all next time for the next video. Goodbye.